Today we're taking a look back at a very interesting smartphone from the Sony lineup. It's the Xperia XZ2. It had some really interesting features that you don't see on a lot of other phones. For example, 960 FPS ultra slow motion recording. And also a 3D creator app where you can scan objects with your phone and turn them into 3D models. But let's start with the design, because back then it looked a lot different compared to all the other Sony phones. While most previous Sony smartphones had a flat and rectangular design, this one looked a whole lot different. They tried to make the phone look and feel more modern. There were some people who really liked this new design, but also a lot that didn't. Instead of making a back flat like almost all phones, they made the phone curves around the back, which means that it felt much more comfortable in your hands. However, by making the glass curved, it also caused some issues. For example, when you put the phone on a flat table and touch the phone, it would wobble a lot. And it could very easily spin around, which isn't a good thing. Most previous Sony phones had the fingerprint sensor on the side, but this one had it on the back. However, it looked and felt very similar to the camera. So a lot of people would touch the camera instead of the fingerprint sensor, so the camera would get dirty. And that was also because the fingerprint sensor was very low on the device. However, the new design wasn't completely terrible. Because it had glass instead of aluminium on the back, it had support for wireless charging, which the previous version didn't have. But sadly, they did remove the headphone jack, so that was very disappointing. The interesting thing though is that they brought it back after a while in the Xperia 1 Mark II, because people complained that it wasn't there. For the software, it originally came with Android 8, but it got an upgrade to Android 10. But it's nothing special, it's stock Android with a few Xperia features on it. For example, a different clock and weather widgets, and there's also a one-handed mode. They also have some display settings, for example adjusting the white balance and color gamut and contrast. But the phone is sadly only on the 2020 security update, but other than that it still feels smooth and you can still use it like a normal phone. Opening apps and switching between them still works fine and it doesn't feel slow. And most apps can still get the latest updates on here, so that's really nice. The power and volume buttons are very far apart from each other, so that's kinda weird. But it does have a camera shutter button. And if you have pressed the button, it will focus, and when you fully press it, it will take a picture, just like a normal camera. So let's talk about the camera. It has a single 19 megapixel camera on the back, and it can still shoot some nice images in my opinion. With good detail, but decent dynamic range. And in low light it can still shoot some decent images, but it's nothing amazing in low light. And for recording video, this was the first smartphone that could record in 4K HDR according to Sony. But I prefer to shoot in 4K without HDR. And the videos out of the Xperia XZ2 look really nice in my opinion. I actually used the camera for one of my videos. Some shots of the iPod Touch 5 video were shot on the Xperia XZ2. Keep in mind that's only a few shots and definitely not all. And in my opinion it doesn't have a smartphone look with an over-sharpened image to it. It looks natural but with good detail. However, sometimes I am not a big fan of the colors. It can also shoot 960 FPS super slow motion, which is very impressive for a phone, but keep in mind that's only for a very short period of time, so you can't continuously record 960 FPS. You can shoot in Full HD or in HD, and when you shoot in HD, then the final slow motion will be 6 seconds instead of 3 seconds, because it has less resolution. I think it's a really cool feature, but I understand why they removed it in newer models, because the resolution is low, and you need a lot of light for it to work well. But even though it has these downsides, it's still a fun feature to experiment with. It also has lens correction options in the settings, but also features like full manual control. And then there was also a separate 3D creator app. And you can scan objects by walking around them, and it would create a 3D model that you could later import in 3D editing software. However, the models were sadly from a very low quality. So it isn't that useful if the scans don't look nice. And because of that, they also removed this feature on their newer phones. Which is really disappointing, but on the other hand also understandable, because for most people it's not a very useful feature. And again, it didn't always work perfectly. But it was really fun looking back at the Sony Xperia XZ2. I think it is a very interesting phone, and not only because of its design, but also because of the camera features. What do you think of this phone? Let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching.